Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma, and I am the host of Atheist Torah Study. Today, we are going to be discussing Parshas Vayakhel and Parshas Pekudei. It's a double Parsha. So, Atheist Torah Study is my own personal exploration of the text of the Jewish Torah, and it's an exploration of how the text reads to somebody who is both respectful of the text and deeply curious about it and very much interested in the tradition, but who also is an atheist. For me, being an atheist means that a long time ago, when I was about 18 years old, I realized that the texts that were being presented to me didn't in any way describe the world. It didn't describe the natural world. It didn't describe any kind of truth. And that set me up for some cultural dissonance because people around me believe the texts are real. I mean, most people I know believe that texts, it's not that they believe that they're really real. I mean, Westerners, most Western educated religious people know that there's a lot of information in their text that isn't real, but they still believe in the fundamental truth of it. They believe in the fundamental in some foundational reality to the texts. And for me, with my brain, the kind of brain I have, once I understood that the text wasn't real, I understood that it didn't describe anything real. I mean, it didn't describe any kind of truth. It was a text that described something aspirational, and everything that's in the text is, but behind the text, it's psychological and it's social and it's political and it's imaginative. It's also aspirational. So the text is this confusing cluster of impulses and ideas that were recorded in ancient history by people who believed in the mythologies that their their cultures told them, and they believed in those mythologies well enough to create texts that framed and centered their day-to-day lives. And so one of the things that I've learned in my exploration of the Torah this year is how the Torah is a document that is intended to create a way of living. It's like putting on a piece of clothing. And here's your religion. Here's how you put on your religion. Here's what you do with your religion. And here's how the Torah shapes your entire life and gives it meaning. Um, and I don't think I ever really understood before so clearly how it's a text that was constructed to create your identity. Um, I mean, as I think about it, though, that's almost everything that we do as human beings is designed to do that. I mean, in our own Western education system, we're designed to be good workers and to be citizens. I mean, right now in this country, the fanatical religion of the moment is nationalism. And this Christian nationalism is creating its own Torah. It's creating its own foundational set of rules about what constitutes nationalism, about what constitutes identity. And so, as a transgender woman, it's very easy for me to see how I don't fit into the narrative that's being constructed in my own time. There's a Torah being written right now in my own time, and it excludes me. And the Torah, as it was written in its time, was intended to create a certain kind of person. And part of why I still, I mean, just a minute. Anyhow, so the Torah in its own time was intended as a document to create a certain kind of identity. And I think that part of the genius of Judaism is that over the years, it's taken the document and it's been able to repurpose it. So much so that it's gotten to the point where the text itself has become, in some ways, kind of the sacred object of devotion. I mean, the text is the centerpiece of Jewish life. And it's the centerpiece of Jewish life because it's elevated in a way that goes far, far beyond the foundational meaning of the text. I mean, I think that Jews at least understood that the text was extremely problematic. And that's part of why they created the Talmud. They created the Talmud as a way of trying to deconstruct the text. Now, as an atheist, I would have said, I mean, you have to understand that the people at the time when the Talmud was being constructed were as devout as people now. And so once they had a foundational text that they connected with their idea of a divine experience, then that locked the text into a certain kind of meaning. And the same has been true of the Christian Bible and of the Quran. I mean, once people have a body of work and they've decided that it has this foundational sacredness to it, then it kind of remains, in some ways, it remains stuck there. And the people who have decided to inherit and preserve the text have to then figure out how to work with the communities of their believers because it's a natural instinct of parents to indoctrinate their children into what they see as some kind of foundational truth about the world. And so for me as an atheist, I mean, I think that part of what's curious about this is trying to understand how people come to believe that a foundational text is sacred and somehow is something worth excluding all other texts because in order for, I mean, unless you're a Unitarian or a Zen Buddhist or a philosopher, it's hard for most human beings to take in more than one foundational text at a time. I mean, sometimes they can take in two if they're married to somebody else who has a different foundational text from theirs. But it seems like it's really difficult for almost anybody who has adopted a foundational text to then take that foundational text and say, okay, now I'm going to adopt three other foundational texts. And all four of these foundational texts are going to somehow be foundational to my identity and to my existence. And as an atheist, I mean, it's pretty easy for me to do that. I mean, that's part of why it's easy for me to. What I mean is that I don't adopt any of the foundational texts as foundational because I understand that they're all these complicated cultural narratives. And what I'm trying to do right now is trying to understand my Jewish cultural narrative as best I can. And it's it goes far, far beyond the text. So anyways, that's my introduction. So thanks so much. I always have really long introductions. Today is Parsha Vayakhel and Parsha Pekudei, which are the most boring parshas in the entire Torah. Sorry, but they are. They're just, it's so hard for me to even read these parshas because they're just, I mean, they were written by somebody who I I think they were in the height of ecstasy around how to do their process. And everything that's in this text is just like this ecstatic exhalation of how you put together um, an altar, basically. It's how you put together an altar, how you make a portable tent that you carry around in the desert. And the reason that they're so excited about this is because this is where they believe God lives. God, this is in in the text, I think, as it was originally meant to be understood, which is, I mean, you have to understand. So Parsha Vayakhel and Parsha Pekudei were both written after the fact. I mean, I I was doing a bunch of research about this in order to prepare for the Parsha this week, and I just keep on coming up against the same two narratives, and it's like I'm trying to decide which one I believe. So, the narrative as I first understood it when I really began to study Torah was kind of the Richard Friedman narrative, and this is it's not Richard Friedman specifically, but it's the narrative of it's basically the consensus of most contemporary biblical studies, especially Jewish biblical studies, is that these parshas were written sometime during the Babylonian exile. They were written as a way of um, either upon return or or written in exile, uh, either as a performative document to hand over to the Babylonians, so the Babylonians had a foundational text, or as the document that was partly written in exile and then returned when Babylonian exile ended. Oh, and just for the sake of clarification, the Babylonian exile was something that happened. Allegedly, it happened around the 570s. It was like I, I. This is just what I've been taught, so I'm just going on what I've been taught. I've never seen the scholarship, but I believe it to be true because it does have pretty wide consensus, and the people who taught me are scholars, and I think they anyway. Uh, so the story goes that the Babylonians conquered Israel at some point, like I think it was Judea. They conquered Judea, the southern kingdom, in like the five, maybe the 640s, because I know they were in exile for like 70 years or something like that. Anyways, and according to the way that I was taught the story, the Babylonians generally tended to, and some of this I read. It's been a while since I've read this. I'm not citing the sources right now. Um, I don't mean I'm not citing the sources because I don't want to. I'm just being sloppy, and I'm just talking about what I was told. So the Babylonians, or what I read, without this is just how I do it. This is just informal. It's just for me. Anyways, so the Babylonians conquered different smaller kingdoms around them. That was part of what they did, and they would, according to the scholarship that I read, they would take kind of the elites of the cultures that they conquered, and they brought them back into Babylon as prisoners. But they didn't like give them really harsh lives. They just, I don't know, they captured their leadership. And I think, if I was just intuitively thinking about this, I would say that what they're thinking is that if kind of like what the United States is doing during the week right now that I'm talking about this, the United States, in its brilliance and its sheer stupidity and I'm sorry, I was being ironic there. It's complete idiocy. Decided that they thought it would be a good idea to murder the head of state and the religious leader of the entire Shia Muslim population. And that somehow, if they murdered the leader of the Shia Muslim population, they would cause the Iranians to revolt and to create a democracy in their country. And if nothing else, then they would at least slow down the Iranians for a while. And this combined brilliance of the Israeli government and the United States government, of course, was shortly thereafter uh, replaced with the son of the Shah, or I'm sorry, the son of the Ayatollah, who's now the new Ayatollah. And they can continue to murder Ayatollahs for 1,000 lines of succession, and there'll be another Ayatollah because the Shia Muslim tradition is a Muslim tradition. It's the religion of a minority, but a significant minority of the world's population. We're talking hundreds of millions of people. So they're not going to have a problem finding someone to replace that person. And all it's going to do is just make the entire Shia Muslim population hate the United States even more than they already do. And I'm pretty sure it was kind of the same thing back in Babylonian times. But the Babylonians didn't always murder the heads of state or the elites. They just basically took them all in captivity back to Babylon. And I think they were doing this because Babylonians kind of viewed their empire as the greatest, and they would enhance their greatness by taking in and absorbing all of the traditions around them. And so that's what they did. The Romans did some of the same thing. I mean, the Romans were more about military conquest and just about population control. I don't think that the Romans had quite the same interest in absorbing the minor cultures that they conquered, like absorbing their culture into the foundational element of their own structure. But it's really interesting because the Romans didn't have some sort of foundational cultural theology, they ended up absorbing one of them anyways. Of course, they absorbed the Christian religion, which was basically another kind of Judaism, a very strange kind of Judaism because it created a religion in which the God created a human as a son, which is pagan. I mean, I think that's why it appealed to the Romans because it had elements of it that were foundationally pagan. Jews would never make a son of a god as part of their religion. Jews would never do that because Jews have a very specific idea about what God is. And God is not a human. God would never become a human. Uh, in Jewish tradition, humans are kind of like they're sort of like God's friends, you know. I mean, they're the friends of God, and but generally God is kind of like their parent in Jewish tradition, but not their parent in a human sense. So although the the God in the Torah is very human in every possible way. So but over time, I think part of what's interesting about Jewish tradition is that over time the tradition actually, and it could be that the tradition, even when it was first getting started, imagined their God as something much, much, much different from a human. You know, something that was the Jewish God is like, you know, it's supposed to be like the God of everything. Like the Jewish God is supposed to be like the God of all of space and time and something that's so far beyond reason and comprehension that it can never be understood and the mystery of mysteries. So, you know, that's kind of the Jewish God. And I think over time that's sort of become the Christian God too, and the Muslim God. It's definitely the Muslim God. I mean, when you look at how Muslims in the Quran see Allah, it's very, you know, I mean, not everything in Islam corresponds. I mean, all of the the monotheistic traditions, like part of what I'm realizing as I do this Torah study too is that it's really helping me to understand like the three really major flavors of monotheism in the West. And it's, you know, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. There's other kinds of monotheism. I mean, there's Mormonism, and I'm sure there's lots of other monotheisms um, off the top of my head. But those are the three major monotheisms. And each one has its own kind of flavor of what their God is. I mean, but each one, it's still over time, there's been so much correspondence between the different cultures, like between Judaism and Christianity and Islam. They've all kind of influenced each other in different ways, like whether they're aware of it or not. I mean, Judaism is unique though, because Judaism has been able to, in some ways, all the way up through modernity, has been able to exist in a little bit of a silo. I mean, not totally a silo because it's still constantly being permeated by Christian thought, especially, but also by Muslim. But anyways, it's had a chance to sort of develop its own particular kind of monotheism. And it's had a chance to answer a lot of the questions that were set forth in its foundational text. So, it's a work in progress. It's a work under construction. And I find all of that very interesting. I really do. Even though it's like, I mean, for me as an atheist, none of it's true. There isn't any truth in almost any of it. And that doesn't mean that there isn't any wisdom in it or that people haven't been able to make meaning out of it. I mean, as it's like a jazz music of human experience. It's like a lot of what goes into the text that makes it interesting is like the kind of scatting that they do like in jazz. I mean, it's the kind of scatting that they do where they'll take a line and they'll just kind of run with that line and they'll find out what the human imagination can come up with to fill in the space in between. Now as an atheist, I would say, well, isn't there something much more interesting that you could do with yourself and your life beside cling to some foundational text as a way of trying to understand morality or ethics or human experience? I mean, isn't there some better way of doing it? And of course, the answer is yes. Yes, of course, there is. I mean, in modernity, we've tried to do that through academic institutions and through scholarship and learning. We've done that through psychology, through sociology, through anthropology, through archaeology, through biological science, through zoological science, through um, geology, through astrogeology, through physics, quantum physics. I mean, we've taken all of these, and these are now the language of academia is our new Torah. I mean, it really is for our culture, for our society. But we still have this other Torah too, this other Torah that people have, I mean, or their Bible or their Quran. And so we have these two, we kind of have two Torahs right now in the world. We have the religious Torah, and that's the Torah that kind of existed before modernity. And now we have the I don't want to call it secular. We have the academic Torah, which is all of the great work that's come out of um, human human beings since we really began to not only. I mean, there's always been academic letters. There's always been uh, higher learning, but it wasn't something that was widely available to the masses, and it wasn't something that we foundationally oriented our society towards. And so when part of what it's about when you really look at it with both of these, I mean, it's really interesting that the Torah and that the Bible and that the Quran have hung on for so long as a way of like kind of basically orienting an entire society. Because I think that I mean, there's this vehicle that was created, there was this vehicle that was created by these people back in the Hasmonean era. This is what I believe in. Getting back to where I was at a little while ago. I mean, there's this vehicle that was created by the people back in the Hasmonean era when the Judeans finally, flung off the what was it? The anyways, the descendants of Alexander the Great. There was the three kingdoms, the Seleucid, the I can't remember the name of it right now, anyways, but it's the part of Alexander the Great's kingdom that ruled over Israel until the Hasmoneans overthrew them during the Maccabees. And so when the Hasmonean kingdom came into effect and they created this document that was supposed to construct and hold together religious identity, I don't think that they were viewing it as a blueprint for all of Western monotheism. you know, I mean, honestly, I don't think they imagined a world in the future in which almost everyone around them was a monotheist. I mean, they were surrounded by polytheists and by people who just didn't have religion, didn't have, some sort of architectural framework that centered their identity. So, I mean, I think that part of the genius of this document is that it began a process of creating a certain kind of religious nationalism that has continued all the way into the modern era. And so, people who have power figured out that organizing their power bases in terms of nationalism around foundational texts was extremely useful, you know. But I think that, you know, the other two monotheisms are monotheisms of empire. Judaism isn't a monotheism of empire. Judaism is a monotheism of tribalism. It's a monotheism of it's never tried to be a monotheism of something other than what it was originally. And so it's retained a certain kind of imprint of monotheism that I think the empire-based monotheisms just haven't been able to match. And that's part of why it's been able to survive and do so well against the monotheisms of empire. So, anyways, so back to Vayakhel. So Vayakhel is it's a double parsha, Vayakhel and Pekudei, and it's the end of Exodus. So it's the end of the story. This is, if you remember at the beginning of Exodus, Moses was born, and this is the end of Exodus. And at the end of Exodus, it's it's kind of has like this glorious end to it. And I think that's how the writers kind of understood it. Like the writers tried to imagine that the end of Vayakhel was I mean the end of Exodus, the end of Exodus was supposed to be glorious and kind of concluding in the same way that the end of Bereshit of Genesis was. So at the beginning of Shemot, we have a birth, and then we have a long story, and at the end of Shemot, there's like this glorious conclusion, kind of. Just like, I mean, it doesn't exactly follow that way, but it's hard for me otherwise to understand why the book ends here, because it's just, it's a weird place to end a book. But it's like, so basically, the way that the book ends is like they're out in the desert. I mean, I think it kind of makes sense when you think about what's happened in the whole story. I think that I think that the writers were thinking, okay, so we have this foundational story. We've been through this big journey. So all the drama has happened right here. It's happened right here in this book. You know, it started with a birth of somebody who was unknown, and then he had this long arc of a story of development, and then he had a big confrontation with the powers that be, and they overthrew the powers that be, and then they wandered in the wilderness, and then and they had great miracles, and then the leader of the people went up to the mountain, and he got the magical stories, and he brought the magical stories down, and the people rebelled, and then the divine murdered them, and then after they were murdered, the people that were left were scared into compliance and were deciding to be obedient with their leader. And since they were trapped out in the desert, they didn't have any choice except to follow their leader. So it's a very strange story. It's a very strange story, and it's a story that's meant to be understood in reverse. So it's a story that was written, you know, when what it was a story that was written when none of this had ever happened, and then it was written in reverse to be a story about something that never happened, but to tell everybody that it did happen. So I mean, it's basically an act of propaganda. I mean, but when you think about it, everything that, you know, I mean, this is really, I think this is part of the genius of the writers. And unfortunately, it's always been the genius of all propagandists everywhere, is that everything that you tell somebody about the past is propaganda. It's you're telling people, I mean, it's important to tell people the truth, at least as much of the truth as you know. But when you look at philosophy and really understand what philosophy says, I mean, contemporary philosophy says that you can never really know the past. You can never really know motivation. You can never really understand, and to try to understand something as complicated as cultural identity and as cultural purpose is something that you're just never going to be able to approach. I mean, anything that you so anything that you write right now about the past is an act of propaganda. It's like what you're doing is you're doing storytelling in order to in order to fill a human niche. There's this part of our human psychology that's been doing storytelling for as long as we've existed as a species. So in a way, it's an act of propaganda. In another way, it's not. In another way, it's just human nature. I mean, it's something that it's evolutionary, is really what it is. It's evolutionary. Now, do I have any proof of that? No, I don't. It's just what I believe. So if I have a religion, that's my religion. My religion is I believe that human beings have been doing this since time immemorial. We've been telling each other stories. Ever since we invented language, we started to tell each other stories. And the stories that we tell each other got so complicated and got so involved that they helped us to develop. And over time, I mean, but what caused that to happen? I have no clue. I have no clue what, I do not know why human beings exist and what our purpose is and what we're supposed to do other than reproduce and take care of each other and do everything that we already, I mean, our evolution, our nature as a species already tells us what we're supposed to do as animals. So we already know that. As for our intellect, as for our consciousness, as for our societies, I have no idea what we're supposed to do with these. I mean, I know that we're not supposed to be destroying the world like we are right now. We're just making a bloody mess of everything. And it's going to be really interesting to me to see how, like one of the things I don't think religion is capable of doing right now is dealing with global warming. I mean, I just don't think that religion really has a narrative to understand the future as it shapes our species. But religion has always really been very adaptive. I mean, religion has always been very adaptive. I mean, there's things I think that are coming up that are going to be a real challenge to monotheisms, and I mean, I do think that really dramatic climate change is going to be one of those because I think that when you just completely mess with all of the agricultural cycles of human beings and when you mess with their sense of what their seasons are and with where they get their foundational security, that causes a lot of chaos. And what's happened in the past when like total chaos is sown into human systems is that it generates new religions. I mean, it really does. It generates new religions because it generates new foundational texts. Now, what kind of a religion would come out of this moment? I just have no idea. And I don't know, it may be that, I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about is that we might be at a point in human development where religions that are based on foundational documents aren't going to be able to they're not we're not going to generate a new religion. I mean, I think that the foundational documents that have shaped the foundational religions will continue, you know, for who knows how long. I mean, as long as they continue to remain useful. But it's hard to imagine like an entire new religion being constructed out of this moment because I mean, we've moved so far beyond that. Anyway, so let's get into the text. I'll read a little bit of the text just to kind of give you a sense of what the text is like this week. So one of the first things about the text, I'm probably not going to get very far past this. So um, I'm going to just talk about the very first part of the text. But before I do, I'm going to talk about the rest of the text, just so that you understand what it is. So the rest of the text is basically a set of IKEA instructions for how to build the Mishkan. And the Mishkan is like, it's this imagined reconstruction of the temple, which is where animal sacrifice was performed. And here it's basically going into just extreme detail. It's almost like a blueprint. It's trying to basically give you a blueprint for how to build this this temple, this portable it's not a temple, but the Mishkan, how to build this portable space for religious devotion out in the desert. And so that's basically what it's all about. It's talking all about gold and silver and copper and um, different kinds of precious stones and precious threads and it I mean it's just extreme detail, like how long you make each sheet of linen, where you put the clasps, what kind of wood you use as poles because you're going to carry it around. It talks about these two artists named Oholiab and I can't remember the other guy. Anyways, it talks about these people who are like making the art. The symbol of a menorah comes in here. They talk about how to make a menorah. Um, the cover of the ark where the seraphim look at each other. So on the cover of the ark in the story is there's this it's like an ark, it's like a box, and then there's a lid to it, and the lid has these two creatures looking at each other. They're called seraphim, and they're supposed to be looking at each other, and then in the space between the two creatures looking at each other, that's supposed to be where God lives, so that's supposed to be where the divine is. And anyway, so it talks about making those and how like the artist made them all out of one thing, and everything they did was a miracle, and everybody was giving of themselves. And I mean, so for me, one of the parts of the Parsha that I find a little bit interesting when I was reviewing it again this year was there was this part of the Parsha that talked about how the women in the Parsha, like they all had these copper mirrors, and they gave their copper mirrors so that they could make something to make the lavers. I think was it. It was like so that they could make the place for washing because you have to wash yourself. It's all very confusing. The whole parsha is just so, I mean, I don't understand why this is in the Torah. It's just it, I don't understand it at all. And I mean, as an atheist, there's nothing very offensive about it because it's just basically a big art project. I actually find this part really interesting from the perspective of an artist because I mean, it'd be like if I was trying to talk about how to make a sculpture park, you know, like let's say I wanted to make some crazy sculpture park with like postmodern sculpture, and I was going to put it in a city park somewhere. And I decided that I wanted to write a sacred 2 chapters about how to make my sacred sculpture park and how do I twist the metal and how where do I put the stand to hold up the sculptures. It's like to me that's kind of what this is. It's so incredibly detailed. I mean, it's just so super, super detailed. So, I don't really understand why this is in the book. I mean, it's here because, and it's like, it's already, they've already talked about this to death. They've just talked about this so much, and they just can't. I mean, this is like so much of the Torah. This is like, if you read the Torah over and over again, like Jews do, I mean, by the time you're done with this, you know as much about how to build a Mishkan as you do about, you know, the entire lives of like all of the patriarchs of the story, or you know it as much as you know more about how to build a Mishkan than you do about how the divine created the world, or the first 2,000 years of human history. It's like you just it's like I mean literally it's three entire parshas. Really, it's almost 4 parshas just on how to do this. And it's like I guess these so the reason so I mean according to the documentary hypothesis, which is what a lot of religious scholars kind of understand the text to be now, this is the priestly text. And my rabbi talks about this a lot. I mean, she's very knowledgeable about this. And so this is this is the priestly text, and here the priests are putting together this document because they want it to reflect well and they want it to speak well of what they do. And it does in a way. I mean, there's, it's like if you step away from the text and you kind of even if you're just imagining how it's imagined, because that's really what I'm doing. I'm imagining this how it was imagined. But for the people who wrote the text, they're just imagining it. And when you just think about how they were imagining it, obviously they thought very well of themselves, I mean, and they this another thing about the placement of the text. So this is placed right next to the golden calf. And so in the logic of the Torah, this is placed right next to the golden calf. And so it's it's about redemption. It's about redemption. This is like makeup sex. I've never I don't know if I should talk about that. Anyways, that's what it is. It's like makeup sex. It's like, the Jews were really bad, and so they did a really bad thing, and now they're being really good, and they're all happy, and they're all like giving of themselves, and everybody's happy. So, anyways, that's what's going on here. From but again, that the people who wrote this, they're very proud of themselves because they they just go into such detail. You know, for me as an atheist, in a way, I mean, the text is so. I mean, one of the things that I thought about in the text was that, in a way, this text, like if I'm looking at it from another narrative point of view, this this text is telling me something that's a big clue. It's kind of a clue to how people have always been, almost since the beginning of time. Because a lot of what this text is about is it's about things that are considered to be highly valued in the ancient world. Gold, silver, copper, purple is just incredibly rare. It's really hard to get, and so a lot of this is the story of how these metals were obtained. And there's something really useful, universal about that. So in a way, they're connecting the idea of the God with really, really ancient, super ancient ideas about gods and about experiencing something mystical. Because, this there's a funny relationship between metallurgy and religion that goes way, way back. And my other rabbi, my first rabbi, well, I'm not going to use the many names, but the rabbi who I really studied Torah with, who really taught me Torah, um, talks a lot about the origins of copper and copper mining in Israel, in the Levant, and how mining for copper and all of the religious symbolism, everything that went into the construction of copper, um, and went into the how copper became this element, not just of utility, but also an element of reverence and of kind of the sacred, helped in some ways to really become foundational to the cultural identity that later became Judaism. So in a way, in some ways, what we're looking at here is like, this is really the really, really old stuff. I mean, when you look at the connections that almost every religion has had to precious metals, to gold, to silver, to copper, to clothing. These are things that were traded and were highly valued by all religious cultures. And part of the reason that they're considered so valuable is because they're actually symbols of the elites. These are really symbols of the elites. And that's part of what gives them their value, is that they're these symbols of the elites. And so the elites are also connected with the idea of a divinity. So the idea is that the elites within your culture kind of interpret the divine. And so a lot in here is about this connection of this elite culture with a divine identity, and then the role that that plays in the orientation of everyone else in the society who's expected to follow the theological text. But what's a little bit different about this, and this is part of what makes it really Jewish, is that this particular imagination, this construction, isn't set in a temple, and it's not set someplace where it's foundationally rooted in an empire. It's actually something that's traveling. It's a traveling altar, and even though everything that people are bringing to it is supposed to be um, things that are foundationally representative of elite culture, it's not an elite tool. So the fact that the tool itself, the Mishkan, is portable and kind of moves around, um, gives it a different kind of meaning from, all of the pharaohs of Egypt who, you know, put all of their gold inside of a giant pyramid. It's a different place to put your gold, basically. It's like, like here in America, we put our gold in Fort Knox, and but in the ancient world, they put their gold in a traveling tent that wandered around out in the desert. So that's a little different. Anyways, it's kind of interesting. But so I'm probably only going to read like the first few verses of the text since I'm almost out of time here. But I wanted to start with this because I think it's really interesting. It's actually, and for a lot of commentators who just don't want to get into all of the everything else that's in these two parshas, which is just, I mean, it was so hard for me to stay awake reading these parshas this week. And I've read them so many times, but it's like there's something in my brain that just shuts off. And it's like after I read about 7 lines of the how you build the Mishkan, like I start thinking about my shopping list, or I start thinking about, uh I don't know, I think about what I have to do tomorrow or something. And I just, I'm not thinking about the text because it's just so hard to keep up with the text. The text is like, if you just imagine your brain as like a blueprint or an AutoCAD chart or something like that, and then you're just putting all these pieces into place in the AutoCAD chart, that's basically what this text feels like. But the very first part of the text is very different. And we will read that and then I'll comment on that for the last 5 minutes. Okay. Vayakhel, chapter 35, verse 1. Moses then convoked the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that God has commanded you to do. On 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to God. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on Sabbath day." Moses said further to the whole Israelite community, "This is what I have commanded." And then it goes in to start talking about the Mishkan. So there's basically just two instructions there about the Sabbath. And so I just want to kind of close by talking about the Sabbath and talking about Shabbat, because Shabbat has a really super important meaning in Jewish identity. I mean, I think in a way, like the fact that Jewish tradition is so observant of Shabbat and so observant of the Sabbath is just it's it's really why it's along with kashrut and other things, it's one of the really foundational aspects of being Jewish. And so here in this text, it's talking about Shabbat. And so Shabbat is like a special day. It's like, you work 6 days and then you take one day off. So it's like, I mean, everybody, well, Christians at least have that. I mean, Christians do it, they take off Sunday, but I mean, Christians do it, Jews do it, they take off Saturday. I don't know if Muslims have Shabbat or not. I have to, that's something I need to understand. But it's this idea that there's a special day and it's like it's kind of your day off. But then it tells you what you're supposed to do during the day. And there's a whole thing about it. It's it's a whole thing. And like on Shabbat, that's when you study Torah. So I've always gone to Torah study on Shabbat, which that's the only thing I do. I mean, beyond that, I don't daven, so I don't pray because I'm not devout in any way. Although I do go to Yom Kippur. But anyways, so it's a really special thing. And so as an atheist, I don't have any problem with that. I mean, people need a day off. Everybody needs a day off. I don't know that you need to have an entire ritual set up around it. I mean, I think, you just take off time when you need to take it off. It's like it's kind of like it's a suggestion, like don't get too caught up in whatever you're doing. Don't get so desperate in your work that you think work is everything, or just don't get too caught up in anything you're doing. Like whatever you're doing, don't get so caught up in it that like you become it. That's kind of what it is to me. It's a nice suggestion. It's not a bad idea. Anyways, well, that's about all the time I've got. You've been listening to Atheist Torah Study. My name's Emma. I'm an atheist, and this is my year-long exploration of the Torah from the lens of an atheist. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week. Next week is the beginning of the book of, is it Leviticus? I think, yeah, next week is the beginning of the book of Leviticus, which, uh, if you thought the Mishkan was tough, just wait till we get into that. Oh boy. All right. Thanks so much.